The night was dark and filled with the sounds of whispering winds and the distant barks of stray dogs. In the port of Denia, a small town in the Valencian region of Spain, the air was thick with tension. 17 galleys from Naples and a dozen foreign merchant ships were anchored in the harbor, their sails billowing in the night breeze. The moon cast a silver glow over the water, but it did little to lighten the heavy hearts of the people gathered on the docks. It was October 2nd, 1609, and the first act of a massive and brutal operation was about to begin. The soldiers, clad in armor and carrying torches, moved through the town with grim determination. They were rounding up the Moriscos, descendants of Muslims who had converted to Christianity, but were still suspected of practicing their old faith in secret. Families were torn apart as parents were separated from their children, husbands from their wives. Cries of fear and sorrow echoed through the streets, mingling with the clatter of armor and the orders barked by the soldiers. 5,000 Moriscos were herded onto the ships, their belongings reduced to what they could carry. Many of them were farmers, artisans, and laborers who had lived in Spain for generations. They had once been a vital part of the community, contributing to the economy and culture of their homeland. Now they were being treated like criminals, forced to leave the only home they had ever known. As the ship set sail, the Moriscos stood on deck, their faces a mix of fear, anger, and despair. They were being sent to the Spanish colony of Oran in North Africa, a place where they would face an uncertain future. Some of them clung to the hope that they would one day return to Spain, while others knew that their lives would never be the same again. The expulsion of the Moriscos was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of years of tension and fear between the Christian and Islamic communities in Spain. The Spanish authorities had long been wary of the Moriscos, believing that they posed a threat to the stability and security of the kingdom. The military threat from the Ottoman Empire, backed by piracy and coastal raids, had only heightened these fears. In the years leading up to the expulsion, Morisco banditry in the south had worsened, and there were incidents of street riots and open rejoicing at the destruction of Christian armies. The authorities had taken steps to restrict and disarm the Moriscos, but it was clear that these measures were not enough. The decision to expel the Moriscos was made by King Philip III and his advisors, who believed that it was the only way to protect Spain from the perceived threat. The Moriscos were not the first to face such a fate. In 1492, the Jews had been expelled from Spain, and many saw the Morisco expulsion as a continuation of the same policy. The Inquisition, which had been established to root out heresy, played a significant role in the decision. The Inquisitor General, Bernardo Rojas de Sandoval, and the Count of Salazar, who was put in charge of the operation, were firm in their belief that all Moriscos, even those who were good Christians, should be expelled. The process of expulsion was carried out in stages, lasting from 1609 to 1614. In all, about 300,000 Moriscos were forced to leave Spain, representing a significant portion of the population in some areas. The impact was immediate and severe. In regions like Valencia and Aragon, where the Moriscos had been a large minority, the economy suffered a catastrophic blow. Tax revenues fell, and agricultural output declined. The Inquisition, which had relied on the Moriscos for a significant portion of its income, also faced financial difficulties. The expulsion was not without its critics. Many officials and intellectuals spoke out against the harsh measures, arguing that the Moriscos were Spaniards like themselves and should not be treated as enemies. Some, like the theologian Pedro de Valencia, condemned the proposal as unjust, while others, like the government official Fernández de Navarrete, called it a mistaken policy decision. Even King Philip III's chief minister, the Duke of Lerma, initially opposed the expulsion, only to change his mind later. Despite the opposition, the expulsion went ahead. The Moriscos were given little choice. Some tried to resist, but they were quickly suppressed. Others fled to the mountains and lived as outlaws, but they were eventually captured and expelled. Thousands of children, under the age of reason, were kept in Spain against the wishes of their parents, adding to the heartbreak and trauma of the families. The expulsion of the Moriscos was a dark chapter in Spain's history. It was an act of fear and prejudice that tore apart communities and families. For those who were expelled, it was the beginning of a long and difficult journey to find a new home. Some settled in North Africa, while others made their way to the Balkans or France. Many yearned to return to Spain, and some did, risking their lives to come back and rebuild their lives. The night of October 2nd, 1609, marked the start of a tragic and unforgettable era in Spanish history. The Moriscos were gone, but their legacy lived on, a reminder of the complexities and conflicts that shaped the nation. In the 16th century, a fascinating and controversial document known as the Gospel was written. It was originally in Spanish, which is interesting because it shows that the author was likely a Spanish-speaking Muslim. The text is filled with references to the Western Mediterranean and even to the works of the famous Italian poet Dante. Scholars believe it was written in the 16th century, possibly by a man named Alonso de Luna. The document's main idea is that while Christianity is a valid religion, its true focus should be on Mohammed as the Messiah. This idea has intrigued Muslims around the world, and some still study it seriously. Alonso de Luna returned to Spain in 1618, possibly driven by a sense of mission. He was in poor health and hoped to end his days in the land that was once Al-Andalus. However, shortly after his return, he was arrested by the Inquisition in Murcia. During his interrogation, Luna described a vision he had where God told him to write to the king and the pope, informing them that the time of the resurrection was near, and that the entire world would convert to the Catholic faith. Luna also claimed that God would help the Arab nation, and that the conversion would happen through the Arabic language, which God had chosen as the best. Luna said that God had revealed to him that the books of Sacrament contained the entire truth of the Catholic and Gospel message, and that one book remained to be read and understood, which would be revealed at the time of the general conversion and the Last Judgment. The Inquisition, recognizing Luna's poor health, decided to release him with a reprimand rather than punish him. They were also hesitant to condemn his claims, as this would have put them in conflict with the Granada Cathedral, which supported the authenticity of the Sacrament tablets. The Moriscos, or exiled Spanish Muslims, merged their lives into the broader Islamic world. Many settled in Morocco, especially in Rabat and Sale, where they continued to preserve their Andalusian culture. They kept alive memories of their homeland through their houses, vocabulary, and music. Even today, their music, played on the guitar, evokes the memories of lost Granada. Despite the expulsions, Islamic influence remained a part of Spanish culture. Many social practices that were once considered Islamic became widely accepted among Christians. The influence of Islamic thought can be seen in the works of Spanish mystics like Juan de la Cruz and Teresa of Avila, who drew on Islamic sources in their writings. Before the expulsions, some Spaniards who were unhappy with Christian values adopted pro-Arab attitudes or even converted to Islam. This phenomenon was not unique to Spain and existed throughout the Mediterranean. War and piracy often led to involuntary conversions, and some Christian prisoners chose to embrace Islam. The number of these converts was significant, and they formed a new frontier society that blended various cultures. After the expulsions, the memory of Islamic Spain was largely forgotten for about 300 years. By the 18th century, Spain had lost touch with its Islamic heritage. However, in the 19th century, the Romantic movement in European literature and Orientalism in art helped to revive interest in the Muslim past. Writers like Washington Irving and artists and scholars from Spain and other countries played a crucial role in this revival. In the 20th century, Islamic Spain saw a new chapter. During the Spanish Civil War, Arab volunteers fought alongside the nationalist forces. After the war, Spain experienced immigration from Africa, and with it, a revival of Muslim claims to Al-Andalus. Today, Muslims in Spain number about 1 million, and there are over 600 mosques in the country. A grand mosque in the Albisan neighborhood of Granada now calls the faithful to prayer, a sight that would have been unimaginable during the Inquisition. The Inquisition, which played a significant role in Spanish history, was not as powerful as many believe. It was one of many royal courts, and often faced jurisdictional conflicts with other legal entities. The Inquisition was under the control of the king, but also had ecclesiastical authority from the church. The tribunal was created by Ferdinand and Isabella to be under their control, and the Pope initially cooperated, though he later protested. The Inquisition was ultimately an instrument of royal policy, but was also an ecclesiastical tribunal responsible to the church. The first Inquisitor General, Tomás de Torquemada, left a lasting impact on the Inquisition. Despite his controversial reputation, he was praised by Pope Sixtus IV for his zeal in promoting the Orthodox faith. Torquemada introduced a statute of blood purity in a religious house he founded, and he played a significant role in shaping the Inquisition's policies. His influence, along with the complex relationship between the Inquisition and the Crown, shaped the history of Spain in ways that are still felt today. In the world of the Spanish Inquisition, the role of the Inquisitor General was one of the most significant. This person was the head of the Inquisition, a powerful and often feared figure. However, the reality of their power was more complex than it might seem. The Dominicans, a religious order known for their strict adherence to church doctrine, played a crucial role in the medieval Inquisition. They were chosen by the Pope to lead the inquisitorial efforts against heresy. In Spain, while the early inquisitors were mostly Dominicans, their numbers gradually decreased. In Valencia, for example, only 6 out of 52 inquisitors over a period of nearly a century were Dominicans. Similarly, in Toledo, just 1 out of 57 was a Dominican. Even at the highest levels, only 6 out of 45 inquisitors general were Dominicans. This shows that while the Dominicans were important, they were not the only ones involved. The Inquisitor General's role was not as straightforward as it might appear. Though they held a powerful position, their authority was often limited and required renewal with papal approval. Sometimes, the Pope would appoint additional inquisitors to assist the Inquisitor General, as happened with Torquemada when he became senile. When Torquemada died, his successor, Diego Deza, continued to face challenges. The political landscape of Spain was complex, and the Inquisitor General's role often intersected with the interests of the monarchy and the Church. In 1504, when Queen Isabella died, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were temporarily separated. This led to the appointment of separate inquisitors for each region. The Inquisitor General for Castile was Cisneros, while Juan Ingura was appointed for Aragon. It wasn't until 1518, after Cisneros' death, that Charles I appointed Cardinal Adrian of Utrecht as the Inquisitor General for both Castile and Aragon, consolidating the Inquisition under one leadership. The Inquisitor General's power was not absolute. They presided over the Council of the Inquisition, known as the Suprema, but the relationship between the Inquisitor General and the Council was often contentious. The Suprema, consisting of about 6 members, met regularly to discuss and make decisions. While the Inquisitor General had significant influence, the Council could make decisions by majority vote, and the Inquisitor General's vote counted the same as any other member. One notable case that highlighted the tension between the Inquisitor General and the Suprema involved Fray Froilan Diaz. Diaz, a Dominican and confessor to King Charles II, was accused of casting a spell on the king in 1700. The Inquisitor General, Balthasar de Mendoza, ordered Diaz's arrest and trial, but the other members of the Suprema voted for his acquittal. Mendoza refused to accept this and ordered a retrial, which led to widespread opposition. When the new king, Philip V, learned of Mendoza's actions, he replaced him as Inquisitor General in 1705. This case demonstrated the limits of the Inquisitor General's power and the influence of the Crown in resolving conflicts within the Inquisition. The Inquisition evolved slowly over time, adapting to changing conditions. The first rules were established in 1484, and these were expanded and refined over the decades. In 1561, Inquisitor General Fernando de Valdez issued a set of detailed instructions that aimed to create a more centralized and efficient organization. These rules were further modified and published in 1627 and 1630, and a comprehensive set of instructions was published in 1667. The Spanish Inquisition was not a unique creation, but rather an adaptation of the medieval Inquisition. The inquisitors followed the same procedures and methods used in France 2 centuries earlier. This included detailed record keeping, the use of indexes, and the careful storage of documents. The Inquisition's approach to heresy and its methods of investigation were well established and rooted in the medieval tradition. Despite its reputation for terror and secrecy, the Inquisition was a complex and evolving institution. It was influenced by the political and social context of Spain and the broader European landscape. The Inquisitor General, while a powerful figure, was part of a larger system that included the Suprema and the monarchy. The Inquisition's legacy is a mix of tradition, adaptation, and the human consequences of its actions. The Spanish Inquisition began as a mobile group of religious judges who traveled around the southern part of Castile, where there were many religious minorities. King Ferdinand later brought the crown of Aragon into the Inquisition's framework, setting up inquisitions wherever there seemed to be a need and where political conditions allowed it. In 1486, for example, a special inquisition was set up by Torquemada to focus solely on the Geronimite order. This inquisition lasted about 5 years. Even when inquisitors had a fixed base, they still moved around to perform their duties. For instance, the inquisitors from Barcelona held public executions in Girona and Tarragona. In the early years, several inquisition tribunals were established across Spain. In 1482, tribunals were set up in Seville, Cordoba, Valencia, and Saragossa. By 1483, they added Jaén and Ciudad Real, which was later moved to Toledo in 1485. In 1484, tribunals were established in Barcelona and Teruel. The following year, 1485, saw the addition of tribunals in Toledo, Llerena, and Medina del Campo, with the latter moving to Salamanca in 1488. In 1486, Segovia and Lleida got their own tribunals, and in 1488, tribunals were set up in Salamanca, Murcia, Alcaraz, Mallorca, and Valladolid, with Valladolid later moving to Palencia in 1493. In 1489, tribunals were established in Burgos, Cuenca, and Osma. Avila got its tribunal in 1490, followed by Calahorra, Sigüenza, and Lleras in 1491. Finally, in 1492, a tribunal was set up in Leon. However, as the number of prosecutions decreased, maintaining so many tribunals became uneconomical. In 1503, the tribunals in Leon, Burgos, Salamanca, Avila, and Segovia were suppressed and merged into the single tribunal in Valladolid. By 1507, there were only 7 tribunals left in Spain, down from 16 in 1495. In the 16th century, some changes occurred. For example, the tribunal at Granada was established in 1526. After 2 failed attempts, an inquisition was finally set up in Galicia in 1574. The Inquisition's network, although it aimed to cover all of Spain, had significant gaps. Inquisitors did not venture into the Pyrenees region until the end of the 16th century. When they first entered the Val d'Anu in the Pyrenees of Catalonia in 1582, they were attacked by a group of about 40 clergy armed with pistols. The Inquisition's districts often crossed political boundaries. For example, the territory of Orihuela in Valencia was under the Tribunal of Murcia. Teruel in Aragon was under the Tribunal of Valencia. Calahorra in Castile was under the Navarrese Tribunal of Logrono, and Lleida in Catalonia was under the control of the Tribunal of Aragon. This was possible because the Inquisition's authority in matters of heresy covered the entire Spanish territory, regardless of political borders. When Portugal came under the Spanish crown from 1580 to 1640, it initially kept its Inquisition independent. However, in 1586, Philip II appointed the Cardinal Archduke Albert of Austria, who was the governor of Portugal, as the head of the Portuguese Inquisition, bringing it closer to the Spanish Inquisition. Each tribunal, according to Torquemada's instructions of 1498, consisted of 2 inquisitors, usually a jurist and a theologian, an assessor, a constable, and a prosecutor, along with other necessary subordinates. Over time, the number of personnel grew. By the 17th century, the major tribunals in Spain had 3 inquisitors each. Contrary to the popular image of inquisitors as fanatical clerics, they were actually drawn from qualified personnel and developed into a sophisticated bureaucracy. Many inquisitors were trained in law at universities and were part of elite colleges. They were not always clergy and could be laymen. Some went on to serve in the high courts of the realm, making service in the Inquisition a stepping stone to a higher career. The Inquisition, being a court of law, ideally needed trained lawyers. However, since inquisitors were often from religious orders, they were frequently theologians. They received their training in the same institutions that produced other state and church officials. Despite this, the inquisitors were part of the state bureaucracy, not the church, and had to develop their practices as they went along. The Inquisition had few tribunals and a small number of personnel, which made it difficult to maintain a presence in a pre-modern world with poor roads and communication. To help, they relied on the local population for tasks such as gathering information, detaining suspects, and transporting prisoners. This was done with the help of familiars and commissarios. Familiars were lay servants of the Holy Office, who performed duties for the tribunal. They were allowed to bear arms and enjoyed privileges similar to other officials. Becoming a familiar was often seen as an honor, and many nobles and titled persons served in this role. By the 16th century, familiars were banded together in a confraternity called the Congregation of St. Peter Martyr. Familiars were not meant to be spies, but they sometimes gained a reputation for being informers. Most denunciations came from ordinary people, in response to appeals or due to personal conflicts. The Inquisition also had to manage conflicts with secular and church authorities, who sometimes arrested Inquisition personnel. The number of familiars was often excessive, leading to agreements to set limits. For example, in 1553, an agreement in Castile set a maximum of 805 familiars for Toledo, 554 for Granada, and 1,009 for Galicia. In reality, the number varied widely. In Galicia in 1611, there were 388 familiars and 100 commissarios for the whole province, but they were distributed in only 6.4% of the towns and villages. In Valencia, there were 1,638 familiars in 1567, with one familiar for every 42 households. Despite efforts to limit the number of familiars, disputes continued. In Aragon, the struggle was even more pronounced due to the region's pride in its constitutional liberties. In Catalonia, conflicts were settled by an agreement in 1512, but the Inquisition never fully accepted it. In 1553, the courts ruled that no official exercising civil jurisdiction in Catalonia could be a familiar. Further disputes led to a 1568 agreement, which was strongly opposed by the Catalans. In 1585, the Inquisition conceded that in Catalonia, familiars and officials could not hold civil offices. By 1609, there were only 15 familiars in the entire territory of Catalonia. In the Val d'Aran, a region technically in Catalonia but part of a French diocese, no one wanted to be a familiar. The Inquisition aimed to recruit familiars from the highest social circles to create a network that would help the inquisitors carry out their duties. In Galicia, the policy succeeded in a few towns, where familiars were successful merchants. In Mataro, a seaport in Catalonia, the familiars were business partners. In Andalusia and Valencia, lesser gentry were a small but significant portion of familiars. In the predominantly rural areas of the Crown of Aragon, most familiars were peasant farmers. In Catalonia, outside the cities, almost all familiars were farmers, with merchants only significant in the ports. By creating a network of familiars, the Inquisition could rely on the local population to help them perform their duties. The social standing of familiars was important, and people were often eager to accept the position because it offered protection from secular jurisdiction and tax exemptions. Despite the challenges, the Inquisition managed to maintain a presence in Spain through this network of local supporters. The Spanish Inquisition, despite its fearsome reputation, had a surprisingly limited impact on the daily lives of most Spaniards. The network of familiars, or local helpers, was not as pervasive as many believe. In fact, the number of familiars declined over time, suggesting that the position, even with its privileges, was not always desirable. In Galicia, for example, the number of familiars dropped by 44% between 1611 and 1641. People in rural areas were not eager to become informers, and familiars often faced discrimination and hostility from their communities. Commissarios, or local parish priests who assisted the Inquisition, were crucial for gathering information and passing on denunciations. However, their quality varied greatly. Some were well educated and capable, while others were less competent. In some regions, like Catalonia, the post of commissario was so unpopular that by the mid-17th century, almost no one wanted to take it. The Inquisition's financial situation was often precarious. It was primarily funded by the proceeds of its activities, such as confiscations of property from those it convicted. Confiscations were a standard punishment for heresy, and they often targeted the wealthier conversos, or converted Jews. This led to widespread suspicion that the Inquisition was more about enriching itself than protecting the faith. Many Spaniards believed that the Inquisition targeted the rich simply to seize their property. For example, a resident of Cuenca once said, "They were burnt only for the money they had." The Inquisition's financial model was similar to the medieval French Inquisition, which also lacked a fixed source of revenue. Confiscations were the primary source of income, but the money often went to paying the costs of the trials and supporting the inquisitors. Some of the confiscated property was even used to fund local needs, like hospitals and city councils. Despite the large sums involved, the Inquisition did not grow significantly wealthier over time. Mismanagement and the dishonesty of minor officials often led to the money trickling away. In addition to confiscations, the Inquisition also relied on fines, penances, and dispensations for revenue. Fines could be levied at any time to cover expenses, and penances were formal penalties often imposed during public ceremonies. Dispensations allowed those convicted to pay a fine instead of serving their sentence, which was particularly useful for those who wanted to avoid public humiliation. These sources of income, while significant, were never enough to make the Inquisition a major source of revenue for the crown. The early Inquisition was created as a temporary measure to address an emergency, and it was not initially designed to have a secure financial base. After the death of Queen Isabella in 1504, the income from confiscations dropped sharply. The crown had to find additional funds to pay the salaries and expenses of the inquisitors. Over time, the Inquisition slowly gained more financial independence from the crown, especially after the Pope granted it income from certain ecclesiastical offices in 1559. This provided a more stable source of revenue, allowing the Inquisition to survive and continue its work. Despite its fearsome reputation, the Inquisition was not the all-powerful, omnipresent force that many imagine. Its organizational structure was often weak, and its impact on the daily lives of most Spaniards was minimal. The Inquisition's main legacy is one of fear and suspicion, but it was not the dominant force in Spanish society that many believe it to be.